My father was one of the liquidators of the Chernobyl disaster. For as long as I can remember, he constantly and at every convenient opportunity told about those events, describing in detail the fire at the station, the emergency evacuation of civilians from the city, and the terrible effect of radiation on the human body. He saw all of it, and thus memories of the past wouldn't let him live in peace. His obsession with everything connected to the atom began over time to border on genuine schizophrenia. Father feared radiation, and he especially feared nuclear war, even when the USSR ceased to exist, and we managed for a while to reconcile with the USA. Plus various unscientific programs in the spirit of modern Ren TV finally finished off Dad's sick mind, in which now besides simple fear various conspiracy theories began to develop. One theory was crazier than another. Mother and I, of course, tolerated him, and then something happened that we weren't prepared for at all. Father disappeared, as if he simply took and evaporated, went out to the street and didn't return. All attempts to find him with the help of leaflets with photographs, the police led to absolutely no result. So 10 years passed until one day in 2008, Dad was found in Murmansk. As eyewitnesses told us, he appeared on one of the city's central streets in December half-naked. His condition was emaciated, his fingernails were missing, his entire body and especially his back were covered in abrasions and scars, and in his right hand he clutched a videocassette where an incomprehensible inscription in red marker read, ZVEGI. The madman walked down the street desperately shouting out our home address with phone number, after which he fell and didn't regain consciousness for a long time until the unfortunate man was taken to the nearest hospital. Having urgently traveled to this unfamiliar city, Father couldn't explain to Mother and me how he ended up in Murmansk, who kidnapped him, if of course, someone kidnapped him, and where he'd been the last 10 years. And only to me alone on the night before his death did Dad reveal a small part of the secret when I sat in his ward from December 13th to 14th, 2008. Unfortunately, I didn't understand everything since the poor fellow's tongue was severely swollen from incomprehensible burns, but the main essence was this. He didn't remember what happened when he left the house, ultimately disappearing for so many years. However, Dad very well remembered and studied that alternative world in which he found himself. This world was an exact copy of ours with several historical changes. The October Revolution of 1917 happened, actually, not in October but in June. Emperor Nicholas II and Empress Alexandra Fedorovna weren't killed in the Ipatiev house, but were brought to trial and publicly executed, as King Louis XVI of France with Marie Antoinette were executed in their time. Some of the Tsar's children survived. The girls went to Canada and lived there until death, and Tsarevich Alex actively financially supported the Third Reich, wanting thus to return monarchy to Russia. Well, and Grand Duchess Anastasia disappeared without a trace during the explosion of a steamship near the Urals. In 1918, she was being separately transported to a safe place from the fighting, as a political prisoner. So in the other world legends of her miraculous salvation and various false Anastasias also existed, just like with us. During the Civil War with Kolchak, biological weapons were used by unknowns, because of which post-war Soviet Russia experienced a serious epidemic together with a major ecological catastrophe. The population was seriously reduced. This was one of those reasons why in the Great Patriotic War the USSR was on the verge of complete enslavement, but the Soviet Union ultimately won, creating the atomic bomb before the Americans and dropping it on Berlin and Dresden. Peace came, but not for long. As Dad later told at the end, he managed to steal that cassette, which he still clutched in his hands, as if something very important depended on it, from a certain commune. As I understood, this was a network of bunkers throughout the country that were mass-built under a certain Marshal Drozdov in case of nuclear war. My father's true nightmare, what he so feared, ultimately materialized in another world. Instead of perestroika, catastrophe happened. It was in one of these bunkers that my poor man existed for the last 10 years, where everything was ruled by a certain totalitarian sect calling themselves biocommunists. And unlike communist ideology itself, where the idea was preached, man is friend to man, with the biocommunists everything was different. Man is wolf to man, survival of the fittest, etc. Society in their underground state was divided into three factions. Class number one, the elite. Second-class workers. Third-class slaves. The latter were people of the lowest sort, used as living firewood to maintain heating in residential complexes, and also for producing canned meat. This was done due to acute shortage of necessary resources, completely substituting everything with human flesh and blood. As you can guess, according to Father's assurance, he ended up among the slaves. All these 10 years he desperately fought for life, trying by all means not to become ash, or at least food. He recalled every such moment experienced with tears. For me, all this was some kind of madman's delirium. I wanted to interrupt his unhinged story, but Dad, through crying, continued and continued. And only by 5 in the morning did the poor man tire and didn't notice himself falling asleep mid-story, and by 2 in the afternoon he died, quietly, peacefully, in his sleep. Father never told me how he ultimately managed to escape from the insane alternative USSR, and what specifically the videocassette with the strange, completely incomprehensible word, ZVEGI, served him. Quite recently, I decided to digitize what he managed to drag with him as living proof of another world. Having first watched this recording in 2008, I experienced wild shock, but then my feelings changed to others, as if I began to sense this cassette as something more, as if I'm one of those people who possesses a unique cinematographic scroll more than 1,000 years old, a scroll that captured foreign rituals and traditions, albeit from another reality. Now I'm obsessed with this world. I want to end up in that world, though it's terrible and inhuman. But still, why did Father never tell me what this damn, very obsessive word means, ZVEGI?
A month before the event, streets were dotted with posters and signs. From them gazed the slightly bewildered and kind face of a young red-haired girl with a book of her own composition in her hands. The inscription below read, "Creative Meeting with A.C.A. Herbert. All the Secrets of Writing and Maury." Of course, our quite deservedly beloved newspaper had to be first to publish an article about this wonderful author, and I was chosen as the journalist to write this article. After all, a young and successful, absolutely incompatible things writer came to our city and even agreed to hold 3 free meetings with readers. The only phenomenon about this girl was the absence of bad reviews, and I had to unravel this secret. Perhaps I should have refused this particular interview, occupied myself with something boring and useless, but just not gotten into this. But one way or another, at 6 in the evening, in our city's public library, I was already staring expectantly at the empty stage, as were 200 people in the audience. The meeting was truly magnificent. The writer endlessly peppered her speech with the most interesting epithets and comparisons, gesticulated desperately, and answered questions. Strangely enough, in contrast to good reviews on social networks, there were very many dissatisfied critics here. I myself can't say anything about her books, since I familiarized myself with them literally just the other day, and that superficially. However, A.C.A. smiled good-naturedly, and it seemed as if all these attacks didn't touch her at all. After the 2 hours allotted for the meeting, I approached her to finally conduct a small interview. When the hall emptied, and only I, the talked-about author and organizers remained, the interview took place. After hearing answers to a couple questions regarding her pseudonym, creative path and such, I asked the main one. Many readers are interested in the review phenomenon. For all your books on the internet, one cannot find a single review that in any way tried to diminish your work. However, at this meeting, there were many dissatisfied critics. How do you explain this? Are you really such a good author, or can everything be attributed to simple comment filtering? It's all quite simple here, she answered, smiling just as good-naturedly. Without false modesty, I can state that my books are quite readable and even, I'm not afraid of this word, brilliant. People who come to such meetings usually express not their own opinion, but the opinion of those with whom they agree about everything. Allow me to digress slightly from the topic. You know, there are such people who, lacking critical thinking, have no opinion of their own. And then all that remains for them is to find someone whose thoughts they will follow all their life and think not with their own head, but only swallow material already chewed by another person. But after meetings with me, they see in me someone they can follow, now already taking my statements and thoughts instead of their previous leader. So, leaving here, dissatisfied critics become my admirers. Thank you for the answer. I'd like to end our interview on a more positive note, so I'll ask you, where do those dissatisfied critics go who nevertheless came here with their own thoughts and opinion? Do you somehow eliminate them as an obstacle to creativity? I asked in a joking tone. Oh, in no case. I haven't even touched a finger to any of these critics. Besides, I already explained my method to you. By the way, I call it review filtering, the writer answered quite seriously. On this, our interview came to an end. Nothing that could dispel rumors or provoke wild reader interest. Therefore, a decision was made not so much by me as by management to follow Asia all the way to the hotel, to exclude the possibility of harm to critics from her or meetings with those who could do this. Having followed the writer's taxi in my car, I drove straight to the hotel where apparently the author was staying. No contacts with the outside world were observed during the journey, but further I couldn't follow her and, for example, learn something from her phone conversations. Had to return with nothing, expecting that the second meeting would yield more fruit. So it would have happened, if not for certain circumstances immediately after it. To the second meeting at the Philology University, I took an acquaintance who had knowledge of Asia Herbert's work. This event took place in a small auditorium and significantly fewer people were observed. My companion and I sat in the back row, but during the meeting, the author recognized me anyway and even, unnoticed by others, winked. This time there were about as many dissatisfied people as last time, and after the autograph session, my friend and I hurried, after one such critic, to exclude any manifestations of cruelty toward him. But surveillance of the unsuspecting man did not succeed. He quite calmly made it home, and then we decided to drown this failure in strong alcohol. You're probably thinking why I call my companion different words that don't specify identity. I don't exclude the possibility that you don't care, but still. The fact is that I absolutely don't remember who was with me that evening, much less who that poor fellow was whom we followed. Only blurred silhouettes remained in memory, but no clear picture. And if the next morning this could be attributed to a hangover, after some time it began to raise questions in me. And to exclude these questions, and also to write certainly not the first, but at least an interesting, I'm not saying best, interesting article, I decided to attend the last meeting with Asia Herbert in our city. It took place at the Journalism Institute, a rather dilapidated wooden building. You'll understand why later. A crowd of young journalists cozily settled in a medium-sized auditorium. Among them, I infiltrated too, hopping this time to be unrecognized. It was late evening, and I even dozed off somehow, listening to the same answers and questions again and again. I was yanked from reverie by loud noise, an almost matured scandal. Listeners rose from their seats and competed in accusing the poor writer of deception, fake reviews and bribes. It seemed something terrible was brewing. The air heated up either from the shouts of agitated journalists or from someone deciding to arrange a distracting maneuver to nip the emerging brawl in the bud. And exactly, now it smelled of smoke from somewhere to the side. The shouts became quieter, and I decided to make my way to the exit as quickly as possible before the youth regained consciousness. The last thing I saw already at the exit, before the frightened crowd rushed at me, was how Asia Herbert's bright green eye playfully winked at me. We regretfully report that the only surviving visitor journalist at the meeting of famous Asia Herbert went mad, wrote his version of events, and died yesterday evening, 3 days after the incident. Our newspaper provides you with a genuine copy of his message, accompanied by photographs of the ill-fated writer, the scene of the incident, and the unfortunate journalist. Is what he described in his drafts actually true? The man himself adhered to the version of Herbert's inexplicable abilities, accusing her of practically witchcraft and cursing innocent people, which she hid under the guise of good nature. Our reliable sources, however, are confident in his insanity due to alcoholism and subsequent head trauma after the fire at the Institute. The writer declined to comment on this matter, citing extreme busyness and dislike of gossip. One way or another, it's up to you to judge whom to believe and whom not. Just be more careful, lest you fall victim to the infamously known review filtering.